This is Secrets to Win Big, your roadmap to sustained growth. Brought to you by Arjun Sen, founder and CEO of Zen Mango, top brand growth driver, and a former Fortune 500 executive who has been called one of the most marketing intelligent minds in the business. Find him at zenmango.com. And now, here's your host, Arjun Sen.
Welcome to Secrets to Win Big with Arjun Sen. Hi, this is Arjun. And I wake up excited to speak to incredible leaders from all walks of life, all over the world. And in that spirit, today, I'm extra excited to talk to and have a conversation with my VIP guest, Dick Celeste. Dick Celeste has an incredible and very unusual career trajectory. He started with his education at Yale and then Oxford. Then he worked at Peace Corps headquarters, then as personal assistant to the US ambassador in India, then in real estate development, and served as the state legislator in Ohio and as the lieutenant governor. After a stint as the director of Peace Corps, Celeste was elected to 2 terms as the governor of Ohio. Celeste headed a small economic development consultancy until 1997, when he returned to India as a US ambassador. From 1990 until his departure for India, Celeste also chaired Government University Industry Research Roundtable at National Academy of Sciences. In 2002, he became the 12th president of Colorado College, where he served for 9 years. He has been and is a member of or chair of a number of corporate and not-for-profit boards. He and his wife Jacqueline have a son, Sam, who is 23 and has 6 grown children from a previous marriage. Welcome to Secrets to Win Big, Dick.
It's good to be with you, Arjun. Thank you very much.
So Dick, first of all, as I started going through your resume and accomplishments, I could start this conversation at multiple places. So I really wanted to first start at Peace Corps. So what were some of the key things that you learned that set you up for this incredible journey?
Well, the Peace Corps was, entered my life at 2 different stages. Once when I was quite young, before I went out to India, and I worked briefly on the staff there. But then I returned a number of years later to become Peace Corps director. And that I became Peace Corps director after I had lost a campaign for governor. So you could say that I sort of won in losing. I mean, when after you lose an election, you can sit around and mope, or you can go on and do something else. And the challenge of stepping in as Peace Corps director with President Jimmy Carter was really very special. But early on, I learned humility, because President Carter's mother had been a Peace Corps volunteer. In fact, a Peace Corps volunteer in India, Arjun. And I kind of assumed that she thought, because I'd had some experience in India at that point in time, that was a selling point. But when I met her, she said, oh, I didn't support you for Peace Corps director. I told Jimmy he should choose somebody else, but he went ahead and chose you. So the first lesson I learned as Peace Corps director was humility, that you may feel that you bring something special, but you also have to be mindful of the fact that you're there with a challenge ahead. The second lesson in the Peace Corps experience was my predecessor had left under difficult circumstances, and morale at the agency was quite low. And so I had to spend a good deal of time in the first few months really focused on morale, and that meant doing a lot of listening. Sitting down with key leaders on the staff in Washington, but equally important, getting out into the field, traveling to where Peace Corps volunteers were working in the field, spending time with them, spending time with country directors, and trying to to get a sense of what they wanted or needed to feel like the organization was moving in a positive direction. So I think listening to the team and listening to the field were also important lessons in the Peace Corps experience. There were two other valuable learnings for me. I was commuting from Cleveland to Washington during the 2 years that I served as Peace Corps director. So I lived in a basement apartment that belonged to a friend. I didn't have a whole lot to do with my time. So I regularly stayed in the office late and read the budget. And that immersed me in the numbers. And I realized that for somebody in an executive position, it's valuable to know exactly what the numbers are, how they work, and be in a position to make important judgments about where you put resources when you have to make choices between several desirable ends. The last important lesson of the Peace Corps was a very tough one. Occasionally, we had Peace Corps volunteers who died during the course of their service. There might be a motorcycle accident or some other tragedy. And I took it upon myself to call their families. I felt that this was not something that should be handed off to somebody at another level in the organization. And that, to me, was probably the most difficult act that I undertook while I was Peace Corps director. Picking up the phone and calling a family and saying, "I'm sorry, I have to tell you that your son and your daughter passed away yesterday in the service of their country." And so I suppose I learned that a leader has to take on the burden, I think, of difficult moments in an organization and not try to pass those off to someone else. So the Peace Corps was an enormous learning experience for me in the course of those several years.
You know, what is fascinating as I'm listening to you is all through you put the organization, the individuals serving the organizations ahead of you. And also that last part about you contacting the individuals when there's an unfortunate loss is truly the sign of a leader at the highest level. And I just want to share a personal story that it connected with me is I wrote a book called Raising a Father, and I was lucky that a copy of the book went to our president, Bill Clinton, and he had nominated me for fatherhood.org. I was going through the nomination process. That's the time my dad passed away. Mm-hmm. And I had informed the organization that I cannot attend the interview. I got a phone call from the office of President Bill Clinton. He himself picked up the phone after that to talk to me, to convey his condolences. And I was stupid enough to say, "Sir, that's very kind of you, but you didn't have to call." And I will never forget his reprimand. He said, "Arjun, in these moments, if we cannot call each other, why do we call each other human beings?" And to me, I really feel that that was such an amazing moment in my life. And you talking about as the head of Peace Corps, taking that tough responsibility, I really appreciate that. Now I want to take you back to India a little bit, which again, I came from India. I just want to understand a little bit about your experience in India, key learnings, how it enriched your life and set you up for future success.
I went to India in 1963, probably before you were born. And I went there as a personal assistant to a man named Chester Bowles, who was the US ambassador to India. I did not know him well. I had gotten acquainted with his son at Yale. And then I worked, his daughter, Sally, was my boss at the Peace Corps in my early days at the Peace Corps. But he asked me to go to India as his personal assistant. So in 1963, I took my wife and my firstborn, who was only 4 months old, and we moved to New Delhi. Chester Bowles was probably the most important teacher I had in my life, it turned out. I didn't realize that that would be the case. He was an enormously successful businessman, but he devoted himself to thinking about the future of our nation and the future of the world. He wrote probably 24 books. I helped him on a series of lectures in India, which became a book called The Makings of a Just Society. But Bowles was really the single most important mentor in my life. So first and foremost, India provided me an opportunity for a unique personal relationship. Secondly, I was kind of adopted by an Indian family. A woman worked for me. Her name was Bim Nanda. She was the social secretary for the ambassador at the embassy, and I supervised her, even though she's about 5 or 6 years older than I am. And she and her sisters became very good friends in those first few months while I was in India. My wife and my son, who had just been born, didn't join me in India for 2 or 3 months. So Bim kind of introduced me to India, and her parents adopted me. I learned many years later that Mama, my Indian mother, had a son who passed away right after he was born. He was born in the year that I was born. Oh. So for Sita, for Bim's mother, I became a son that she didn't have. And I wasn't aware of that at the time, but this welcome into an Indian family, and the strength and support they shared with me was enormously valuable. And over time, I learned, for example, in the United States, we don't do a very good job of respecting our elders, right? Mm-hmm. We put them off on the side. We put them in a home for the aged or whatever it is. In India, you have an extended family. And so every time I would go to Bim's home, I would reach down and I would touch the feet of Mama and Daddy. And it taught me something about respect for the wisdom of elders that I don't think I could have learned in another way. Ironically, when I returned from India, I joined my father in a business building housing for senior citizens. So in many respects, India gave me a wonderful lesson in putting a value on our older generation in a way that I probably wouldn't have learned here at home. Bowles took pains to introduce me to everyone who was involved in public service as they came through. He himself had been governor of Connecticut and a member of Congress and was very close to President Kennedy. And it turned out he wanted to encourage me to think about a life of public service. And so every time we would have a visitor, a member of Congress, or when Vice President Humphrey came through, when former Vice President Richard Nixon came through on a world tour, each time Bowles asked me to be the control officer for these visitors. So I was interacting with many folks who had a political background, and I had the chance to watch them in action and learn from them. So I suppose that period from 1963 to 1967 was a chance for me, on the one hand, to learn a great deal about India and its history, a culture that is thousands of years old, in a way that we in the United States are still very young, and to learn something about public service in my own country as I saw it from overseas.
Wow. And transitioning from there to your time as the governor of the state of Ohio, when our common friend Subrata Datta introduced you to me, the thing he told me with a smile was that Dick is a governor like no other you would ever see. He didn't tell me more. And as I started researching and learning about you, two things that jumped out. Usually any governor is defined by the political party. You are not. And secondly, you have been best described as bringing a far more diverse set of appointees than any of your predecessors. And then you were instrumental in taking the first step to transform Ohio from a manufacturing economy to an idea economy. And as I read that, right away, I started seeing how a governor can truly be the CEO of a state. So let me first ask you, as the visionary, what was the impetus behind the vision to transform the state from a manufacturing economy to an idea economy? And what were some of the barriers that you faced during that journey?
Well, for context, in 1982, when I was elected governor, we were in the middle of a recession. The unemployment in the state of Ohio was over 14%.
Wow.
And we had a $500 million deficit in our budget. And under state law, I had 5 months in which to balance the state budget. So I faced some very substantial challenges. I entered office believing that leadership is a team effort. And as a leader, part of the challenge is to recruit good people to the team and to provide them an opportunity to use their talent and so on. But before, this notion of an idea economy was, I was always interested in science and technology. Let me say that. It was something in fact, I think I got my first taste of that in India also, because in the 60s, the Green Revolution was just getting underway. And I had a front row seat to see some of that work being done. So I had a conversation with one man, Arjun, that made all the difference for me. I called on his name was Reuben Mettler. He was the CEO of TRW. TRW was a large defense contractor based in Cleveland and California. And Reuben Mettler was highly regarded, maybe one of the top dozen business leaders in the United States in 1982. And I asked if he would sit down with me for a while, talk, because I was interested in getting his thoughts before I stepped into office, before I took the oath of office. And the question I put to him is, what can a state do that would convince you to make a major investment in the state? And Rube was wonderful. He was quiet for probably 2 full minutes, and that's a very long time for a person to be totally quiet. He obviously was taking my question quite seriously. And then he said, "Governor, I think there are 2 things that a state could do that would encourage me to invest there." He said, "In the first place, my impression of political leadership is that they make very short-term decisions. And we live in a world where we have to make decisions that look 5 and 10 years down the road. So I would be interested in a state that wasn't thinking about when is the next election, but was thinking about where do we want to be as a state 5 or 10 years down the road." And then after another pause, he said, "And here's the second thing." He said, many people feel, remember 1982, many people feel that Japan is out innovating the United States. He said, but that's not true. He said, what's happening is that in Japan, they move new ideas from the laboratory to the marketplace much faster than we do. And if I saw a state that was investing in ways to accelerate innovation, I would be interested in investing in that state. And those became sort of the two guidelines for how I approached the economic development strategy for Ohio. And the second piece of this goes to the recruitment of talent and the diversity of talent. For my director of transportation, normally that's an engineer and somebody who comes out of construction. I chose the secretary treasurer of the AFL-CIO, one of the top union leaders in the state. No background in engineering, but totally devoted to putting people to work. And I said to him, look, I am sure that there are many plans for highways that sit on shelves in your department. I want you to get construction underway. And then for my director of economic development, I chose a Republican business leader who ran the Chamber of Commerce in Columbus, Ohio. And I asked the two of them, labor and business, to travel the state to meet with civic leaders, business leaders, educators, to talk about what was needed in communities across Ohio to energize the economy. And the goal that I set for them was to develop a 10-year plan for the state of Ohio, a strategy that would provide a framework for us as we made investments, so that these investments were not just for 1 year or 2 years, but really look down the road a decade ahead. And they spent 8 months doing that. And then let me just say one other thing. So on the issue of how do you accelerate ideas from the lab to the marketplace, we had a many-pronged undertaking, which we ended up calling the Thomas Edison program. This involved a seed fund to provide small amounts of cash to people who had an idea in a lab and wanted to start to model it for a market. This involved building technology centers around areas where, as a state, we had expertise. So that could be new materials in Akron, Ohio, where the rubber business was turning into plastics and other new materials, or sensors and manufacturing equipment in Cleveland and Cincinnati and so on. And the bottom line is that Ohio went from 50th in the state in job creation in 1982. 8 years later, we were number 5 in the country in job creation.
You know, what's incredible about what you just shared, 3 things jumped out to me. One, I don't think you said the word I even once. It was all about we. Secondly, during this conversation, you mentioned at least 4 super individuals, and with the smile on your face, the way you celebrated what they did was priceless. And as I was listening to you, I kept thinking that you are literally the Wayne Gretzky of politics. Just like Wayne told us, skate to where not the puck is, where the puck is going to be. You had an eye for where the state needs to go. And just like a super CEO found all the pieces to take the state there, instead of solving yesterday's problems. In my little consulting I have done with politicians, what I've seen is many a time they either want to solve a problem that doesn't exist, because you can't get fired for that, or They want to put the Band-Aid on that makes you look good when you take a selfie with the Band-Aid. But it's totally remarkable. And now I know what Subrata was talking about is you looked at this to be a legacy where you are responsible for the long term of Ohio, not just the 4 years. So truly an honor and a pleasure to listen to you.
Well, I appreciate it. You know, just one other lesson, I think, Arjun, that's very important. And that is something that I came into office believing and then learned even more directly. That is, in any large organization, bad news doesn't travel up. Mm-hmm. You know, it's very hard to get people to feel comfortable enough and confident enough in their relationship with you to share bad news. They want to take care of it themselves. They don't want to bother you, right, with the bad news. And I remember this was an intellectual understanding for me because a very dear friend of mine from my early days at the Peace Corps, a man named Charlie Peters, had written an article after the Challenger disaster entitled "Bad News Doesn't Travel Up," about how hard it is for an organization to get the tough questions up to the top. When I was governor, we had a crisis in 1985 that we hadn't anticipated. It wasn't something that was obvious at any point in time. A big state-regulated savings and loan had a crisis. It had money it had more money than it should have, a major chunk of its assets in a firm in Florida that went bankrupt. And I got a call from the CEO saying, we're in trouble, we need help. And there were 60 of these savings and loans in Ohio that were state regulated, not federally regulated and not federally insured. And people thought the state was going to stand behind that money. And so I had to make decisions to protect 500,000 depositors. They had $5 billion in assets. And I, by executive order, closed those savings and loans. It was questionable whether I had the legal authority to do that at the time, but it was the only way I knew how to protect their money and then take the time, once we had closed them, to review the assets, the books of every one of those 60 institutions and get them reopened. And it was a 3.5 month crisis. We had people demonstrating in front of the State House saying, we need our money. But the commitment that I made was, I want to protect every depositor in every one of these savings and loans. I'm not going to worry about who owns the savings and loans or anything like that. I want to protect the depositors. And in the end, the state had to invest about $125 million in helping to restructure some of these S&Ls that were in serious trouble. But the state received all of that money back, and every single depositor was protected. But that savings and loan crisis was probably the biggest single test that I faced in the course of the 8 years. And it was totally not on my radar screen as a problem when I became governor. It wasn't evident until it, all of a sudden it burst into visibility.
Yeah, what's fascinating is from the time you were at Peace Corps to governor, all through fiscal awareness and fiscal responsibility has been such a big part of your journey. So one final question on your days as governor. Is there a day that stands out that when you reflect back, you're one of the highest pride moments for you, like you really felt, wow, what you and your team have accomplished?
Boy, it's hard to point to a single day. people ask about that experience, and I loved every day that I was working on it. I suppose the day when I described briefly the savings and loan crisis, it's a full chapter in my memoir. It's a long story, but as we were trying to determine what to do, how we were going to handle this situation as more and more savings and loans. There was a run going on. It started with 1 savings and loan and then 5, and it was going to 10. I was on the phone with Paul Volcker, who was chairman of the Federal Reserve at that point in time. And he was very thoughtful, although he didn't have direct authority for this. And I had to make a decision. We had decided there were 3 courses of action I could take. I could let the runs continue, which is the normal thing for a banker to do. You just keep trying to push money out the door until you quiet people down. We thought we could impose what we called limited withdrawal, in which we would say to people, you can only take $500 a month out of your savings account. Or we would close them and then require them to get federal insurance to reopen. There were serious downsides with each of these. The night I had to make a decision, I had called 5 savings and loan executives to ask them whether they had sufficient resources, the cash, to get through another day. This is on a Thursday afternoon. Can you get to the weekend? And 4 of the 5 of them said, we won't be able to do it. We'll run out of cash before the end of the day. So I was going to speak with Chairman Volcker. I did at 3 a.m. I outlined these 3 courses of action. He indicated what he thought were the pluses and minuses with each of these courses of action, but said, Governor, I can't make a recommendation. All I can say is that I'll do whatever I can to help you once you've decided. So I decided I was going to close them and require them to get federal insurance. And at 5 a.m, and I was going to fly to Cincinnati at 8 o'clock in the morning with the head of the Federal Reserve from Cleveland to announce this. And at 5:30 in the morning, the lawyers who'd been helping us, these were pro bono, the best lawyers in town, pro bono lawyers, walked into my office and said, Governor, we don't think you have the authority to do this. And I looked at them and I said, look, on Monday, you told me I had this authority. They said, yes. I said, on Tuesday, you told me I had this authority. They said, yes. On Wednesday, you told me I had this authority. They said, yes. On Thursday, yesterday, you told me I had this authority. And now you're telling me I don't have this authority? And they said, well, we're not confident that you have this legal authority. And I said, you write the executive order and be prepared to defend it at 9 o'clock in the morning, because I'm going to sign it. It is the only way we can protect these depositors. And they did. I signed the executive order. I flew to Cincinnati and we made the announcement. And Arjun, what was on my mind is there was only one person in Ohio who could protect those depositors. And that was me. That's why I was there. That was my job. And I suppose that moment, more than any other single moment, was when I felt like, okay, I'm the governor. This is on me. I need to do this for the people of Ohio.
Wow. I'm just having goosebumps listening to that. It to me is like you watch the highlight reel of an MVP moment. But in the field of politics, usually people don't look at, but as I'm listening to you, I'm not looking at this to be politics at all. I'm looking at this to be the CEO of a state. Wow. So let's look at a little bit about the president as the president of Colorado College. So what made you jump into this part of the journey to make an impact on future leaders of the country?
That's a good question. I was always interested, obviously, in higher education and science and technology. That played a role in the work that we did in Ohio. And when I was governor, my son and some of his friends designed a program which we called University for a Day. And I visited every state university in Ohio, and I spent 24 hours on campus. I would go in and hold a sort of an open session with students answering questions before dinner, have dinner with a group of students. I would stay in a dormitory room overnight. I would meet with the trustees of the university the next morning. I would visit one or two of the things that the university felt made that university special. And so I was very invested in higher education. And when I was leaving the governor's office in 1991, my sons sat me down, I now 8 years as governor, and said, "Dad, we think you should become a college president." That was their career advice to me. And I said, I don't think I'm ready for that. And I went on and we had a small economic development consultancy, and then I was ambassador to India. But as Jacqueline and I were winding up my tour in India, the question is, what are we going to do next? And I was contacted by a headhunting firm with a question about whether I would be interested in a university presidency. And I said yes, and that sort of set the ball in motion. And I was particularly interested because Case Western Reserve in my hometown of Cleveland was open and searching for a president. And so I talked to the search firm that was handling that search. It happened that it was led by somebody who'd been in the Office of White House Personnel for President Carter when I was Peace Corps director, so I knew them. And they came back and said, we think that that you would be a finalist at Case Western Reserve, but we don't think they would choose you, and gave me some reasons why, and I think the reasons made sense to me. So I said, okay, why don't you take my name off that list? What next? And they said, how about Colorado College? And I came out to Colorado Springs to look at Colorado College. I liked what I saw. It seemed like a beautiful setting and a very interesting small liberal arts college with a unique approach to curriculum where we teach one course at a time. And so I said, okay, let's pursue that. And I became president in 2002 and served for 9 years.
Wow. As I'm listening to you, I feel if I have to name this podcast, the title that jumps up to me is Living to Make Tomorrow Better. Okay. Because that's the common theme I see. Peace Corps, the governor of Ohio, the president of Colorado College, you're always looking at what can you add to make tomorrow better, either for the state or for individuals. So with that vision, where did that vision come from? You talked about a few mentors. Is there somebody else we haven't talked about who was instrumental in planting these seeds in you that you always see? Like, to me, I just feel that you have a good vision problem. You don't see just short term, you see path to long term. So how did that come about?
Well, I think, the importance of parents, right? That's where what begins for most of us. I mean, that's certainly something I saw vividly in India. But I have to say, my mom and dad were instrumental in kind of who I am today. My father was a lawyer who did not practice law. He was mayor of our hometown for 8 years. I think he could have served much longer, but he felt 8 years was enough. He was always devoted to community activity. My mom was trained as a social worker. She was active as a volunteer in everything from the YWCA to PTA to you name it. We had foster children in our home. We had foreign visitors who would come. I remember, in fact, we regularly would have a social worker from India come for the summer and stay with us for 2 months. So the example of my parents was very, very strong. And the encouragement and support that they gave me, throughout. I don't think I could have afforded to stay in politics with a growing family. When at the point at which I was governor, I had 6 kids, and Ohio didn't pay the governor enough to have 6 kids to be able to support them. It was my father and my father-in-law who supplemented my income so that I could afford to be in public life. And so I think my mom, when I was probably 12 or 13 years old, my mom encouraged me to make small posters with reminders and put them on the wall. And I remember one of them very vividly: he who never made a mistake never made a discovery. And it was probably the first kind of science lesson that I had. I didn't think about it as science, but and so there was constant encouragement to be part of the community. I grew up active in my church, in the Methodist church, and I was active as a student leader there as well. So I guess I always felt that having an impact, a positive impact, was an obligation. My grandmother, I haven't talked about my grandparents, but they were very special. Both of my grandmothers. My mother's mother was born in 1875, Arjun. When she was 1893, she went by herself from Cleveland to Alaska because she had a brother in Alaska. 18-year-olds didn't do that. She was very adventuresome. And her name was Bessie. And Bessie regularly sort of pounded into me a biblical adage that says, "To whom much is given, much is expected." And she was basically saying, look, you've been given a lot, Dick. A lot is expected of you. And so that was key to my thinking all the way through. And, to this day, I have a pet peeve, Arjun. I'm on the board of a number of organizations that call themselves non-profit organizations, right? Mm-hmm. I hate that term because it's negative. And it's only because that's the way it's described in tax law, not for profit. You and I know businesses that don't make any profit, right? Yep. I call them for impact organizations. These organizations should be measured by their impact. And we should, if I could ban an expression in our day-to-day parlance, it would be not-for-profit organization. From now on, it would be for impact organization, because I think that's what they're meant to be.
And I love that. To me, I think they are, as you said, these are human impact organizations who are making humanity better. And I really think this whole point of view of measuring profit on one dimension, which is financials, is kind of messed up. The bigger profits are what you give people. Like, for example, the leadership lessons that you gave each kiddo at Colorado College, it didn't just impact them, but it impacted future generations too. So now let's just look at the net present value of the impact you make. I can argue that you are not a non-profit, you are a for-profit because you added incredible amount of values. I really love that. So now let me take you to this unique place. Visualize you just walked into this incredible coffee house and you are now sitting with a 16-year-old Dick and a 101-year-old Dick and you, all three of you sitting together having an amazing conversation. What would that conversation look like? Like, what would you like to know from the 16-year-old or the 101-year-old Dick?
So I think I'd like to have a conversation around what, to me, where I am today is my most interesting question, and that is, how much is enough? How much is enough? I think I just I'd be asking my 16-year-old self, how much do you think you need to how much education do you need? How much wealth do you need to satisfy yourself? How much security do you need? How much is enough? I'm at a point in my own life where I have more things than I know what to do with. I'm every time now when I buy a new shirt, I take an old shirt to Goodwill. I think I have enough. And I would be curious with the 101-year-old me, what do you still need? I mean, you can't see where I'm sitting, but I probably have 600 books around me. I've read maybe half of them. The other half I'd like to read. I have photographs that remind me of all of these moments in my life, but how much of it is enough? I'm fascinated by that. And I think when I pause to consider where I am in the global mix, right, of sustainability, of our relationship with nature and how much we need to use of it and how much is there a way we can replenish it? That, to me, I would love that conversation. And I'd be so curious about whether a younger me would have a different set of ideas about how much they need than I did maybe when I was 16. And certainly I would be eager to hear what the 101-year-old me would have to say, because I think there'd be some wisdom there that I lack.
As you're talking about how much we need and how much is enough, my brother is in Mumbai. He called me one time and said he was busy, but he said, hey, I'm texting you some flight details. A friend of mine is traveling through Denver and has a 12-hour layover. Can you just take care of him? I said, yeah. He also sent on a follow-up message, he's pure vegetarian. Pure vegetarian means, for those who do not know, is they do not like food even in the presence of non-veg. And I got it. Okay. And being in Denver, we don't get that many guests coming from India. That to my brother's friend. My daughter and myself, we cleaned the fridge, everything else. We picked up this guy. He showed up. He was wearing a small dhoti. It's a bigger fabric till his knee. He had a tiny bag in his hand. And I'm just saying, okay, so let's get your luggage. He said, no, this is all I have. That's all I need. I'm like, okay. So this man comes over to my place. My daughter and myself, we had cooked the meal. He took every bite and he would say, this is the best I've ever had. This is the best paneer ever. This is the best roti ever. And after that, a 60-year-old man and my 10-year-old daughter became best friends. My daughter gave him a tour of the house. And Nick, in this country, when you give somebody a tour, you just give a tour on the main floor. It doesn't go to the bedrooms.
Right.
All of a sudden I see that this man is sitting on my bed and he's just bouncing up and down and saying, this is the best bed ever. Then he looked at my walk-in closet and said, you have a lot of things. And he gave me this brilliant advice. He said, Arjun, I forgot to tell you that I have a PhD in economics. If you put everything you have into 3 groups of utilities, utility 1 is a group of things that you need on a day-to-day basis. Put them red. Utility 2 is things you have, but you forget, but you really would love to get benefit out of them. Put them category 2. But the group 3 is the most important. People who are not going to use, but you'll find amazing utility to give it to somebody else, cash in on that. And his eyes lit up. I got it. So as he was leaving, he was going towards traveling to Vancouver. And I thought, this man would need a jacket. So he just didn't have one. So I stopped at his departmental store, got him a sweatpant and a jacket. And he really was happy with the jacket. I told him, sir, can you do me a favor? I'll give you a calling card when you reach there. Can you please call me to let me know you're okay? He said, Arjun, I promise. I said, do you keep promises? He said, yeah, I do. He called me 8 days later. And the first thing he said, Arjun, that jacket was amazing. And I'm like, I didn't like the word was. I'm like, what do you mean was? He said, Arjun, when I landed in Vancouver airport, I saw this man outside the airport who was shivering. I gave him the jacket. And I'm really upset. I'm thinking this is a $200 jacket. I gave my friend, what the heck are you doing? And he's like, Arjun, don't scold me. You taught me that when somebody doesn't have a jacket, you give the person a jacket. That's what you taught me. I just followed your lessons. I met somebody who didn't have a jacket, needed the jacket more. And to me, what I realized was this is a man, a monk from India. All he had is a briefcase. And he taught me the utility of giving. And I really, I'm grateful to start my day talking to you, where you took me back to that beautiful concept that if you get a shirt over Christmas, you take one shirt from your closet to give it to somebody else who needs that, because my friend Hari taught me this amazing lesson.
Yeah.
So Dick, this is such a fascinating conversation. I could talk to you for hours, but in the interest of time, every good thing has to come to an end. Is there any final thought that we haven't talked about that you would love to share?
Well, I think along the lines of your story, Arjun, you would ask, what's on my mind when I get up? What's the first thing on my mind in the morning? And I make a practice of gratitude in the morning. I mean, to me, every day is a gift. Mm-hmm. I'm at an age now where I can't take good health for granted. And so I just, I get up and I take time to reflect on how grateful I am for another day, and how grateful I am that my kids and my grandkids and now my great-grandchildren are thriving. And, that you can't take that for granted. I mean, none of us know, but I feel incredibly blessed by the experiences that I've had, and I'm reminded of one story, if we have time for a brief story.
Absolutely.
I'm just finishing up my 8th year as president of Colorado College, and I get a call from my eldest son, Eric. And Eric said, Dad, I'm just calling to warn you. And I said, warn me about what? He said, well, you're sailing into uncharted waters. I said, Eric, what are you talking about? Uncharted waters? He said, you have never held a job for more than 8 years in your life. And you're beginning your 9th year. And my kids tease me about I could never hold a job. And so, I think about where I am now. And for me, all of what's ahead is uncharted waters, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll be 84 in November. And so I'm sailing into uncharted waters, and I am really grateful for every day of that experience.
I'll humbly disagree with Eric because I think you have held on to the same job. You have been the CEO to make the lives of others better in corporate. It's a human impact organization. The only difference is that you have held roles in different functional organizations or departments of that organization, whether it's Peace Corps, but the thread that is there. So Eric, when you listen to this, you and I one day need to have a conversation because I really think your dad is so cool to hold the same one job of impacting the lives of others all through his life. So thank you again.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all for listening to this fascinating conversation. I have to confess with you all, because initially when I was looking at talking to a governor of a state, this is the first time I'm just interviewing the governor of a state. But when I went through his vision and the rest of the impact he has made, I had to talk to this individual. Dick, this is truly, I think, life-changing for me, and I don't use those words lightly. And I truly want to thank my common friend Subrata Datta, an amazing human being, for connecting us and you graciously spending your time with me on this conversation. Thank you again. Thank you all for listening, and looking forward to another conversation with another leader, hopefully nearly as fascinating as Dick Celeste. Thank you all.
You've been listening to Secrets to Win Big with Arjun Sen, founder and CEO of Zen Mango, top brand growth driver, and a former Fortune 500 executive who has been called one of the most marketing intelligent minds in the business. To learn more, visit www.zenmango.com. Share this podcast with your friends and subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts.